First of all, I just want to say if you are building a startup to make money, the chances are you probably won't succeed.
On today's episode, we have Kartike Shekhar, who covers consumer tech investments at Blume. His areas of focus include fintech, proptech, retail tech, and marketplaces. Prior to Blume, he worked with Bridge International Academies, a leading edtech startup in Africa. He started his career in private equity and venture capital at the International Finance Corporation, based in the Washington and Mumbai offices. He has an MBA from INSEAD. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the exciting journey of Kartike Shekhar. Okay. Hi Kartike, how are you?
I'm good, Alok. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing well. I'm excited to have you. And yeah, so where are you right now, and what do you do?
So I'm currently in Bombay. I work with Blume Ventures, we're an early stage technology fund. We invest in early stage startups.
That's great. And you know what I find interesting about Bloom is that uh, you guys just like, hey, if you have any idea, send it to us. Whereas the conventional approach that I've seen with most
Yeah,
VCs is like, they try to create as many barriers and as many filtering mechanisms so that it doesn't get to a point where they are,
yeah,
swamped with all this business ideas. So I find that very interesting, and we'll get more into that. But
yeah, yeah.
right off the bat, I mean, what are the three main criteria you consider when investing in early stage company, and why?
Yeah, look, I think the first is obviously the founders, right? I think we are always looking for, super passionate founders who are deeply passionate about solving a particular problem and who have the ability, to eventually hire the right talent, to fundraise, right? And who will basically be on this journey for a very, very long period of time, right? And who understand the market in a way nobody else does. So, what is that insight that they have that makes them better able to solve a particular problem? So I think founders is number one. The second is, the market itself, right? How big is the market size, right? I think no matter how good a founder is, if the market isn't big enough, then you'll always have these headwinds. So we try to look for, really strong founders building for a very large market. And I think the third and maybe one of the most overlooked things is timing, right? I think you can have a great idea, but it might just be too early for the market, right? Or it might be too late. So we're always trying to see, why is this the right time for this particular idea? So, very strong founders building for a large market, and this has to be the absolutely right time. And I know you asked me three, but I think the fourth one, which also is super critical, is, what is differentiated about this particular approach, right? Is it your go to market that is different? Is it your product design that is different? Is it your understanding of the market that is just superior to everybody else out there? So, why are you the right people to solve this particular problem, and what makes you different? So I think, a combination of these things is what we look for at the early stage.
Yeah, yeah. And you spoke about timing, and I believe timing is sort of one of those factors that really determine the success or the failure of a venture.
Yep. Yep.
Because I mean, I come from a family of entrepreneurs, and I've seen them sometimes try an idea that is too radical, and
Yep.
people are not prepared for it, and
Yep.
sometimes they are lagging behind, and sort of the industry passes them by. So I've seen both
Absolutely.
sides of that equation, and I believe, yeah, timing is one of those things where, you know, a lot of people said that, hey, Airbnb and Uber wouldn't work because you wouldn't feel safe about, a stranger coming into your space. But
Yeah.
because they were this post recession
Yes.
upstarts,
Yes.
everybody
Yes.
felt
Yes.
comfortable, like, hey, I lost my job. I
Yes.
don't mind
Yep.
giving out the extra room in
Yep.
my house.
Absolutely.
Similarly, people were driving for the side hustle, and they just felt
Yeah.
like, yeah, well, a few extra bucks, I don't mind. And so, who knew, like, those would turn into this huge,
Yeah.
giants
Absolutely.
that they are.
Yeah, and sometimes there's no way the timing is right. But I think as an investor, you just have to, as your best guess, because of X, Y, and Z, this might be the right time, right? And then you make the call. But in hindsight, it's easy to say, but you never know, and that's one of the big things about venture is just how much luck is involved truly.
Yeah, yeah. And in a lot of ways, I think, some entrepreneurs here or some investors here sort of wear this thing as a badge of honor. Like, yeah, those guys from Uber showed up on my radar and I had a meeting, but I didn't think the idea was good enough. And then they try to turn their failures into sort of this success story that, yeah, I didn't believe in them, but, that was a
Yeah,
good lesson or something like that.
sure.
But yeah, I think, all of these are great factors, but I believe like timing plays
That's very important.
a huge role. All right,
Absolutely.
okay. So since you began working in finance, what has been the biggest shift in the industry that you have observed?
Yeah, so I think, I started in more conventional private equity at later stage investing at the IFC, which is part of the World Bank Group, and we were doing, later stage debt and equity financing. And my experience has just been over the last 7 8 years, just the sheer tectonic shift towards technology. I mean, I certainly did not predict that tech investing would become so hot, right? And today, and that's the reason I moved into venture, right? I mean, I was doing later stage investing, but I just saw so much movement. I mean, almost like a force of gravity moving towards technology, and I knew I had to be part of that journey. So the answer to that question is simply over the last 8 9 years, the biggest shift that I've seen is the move to technology. If you're not a tech company today using tech in some way, you will just be outcompeted from the market, right? So just the sure, and obviously COVID has accelerated this tremendously as well. So it's just the sheer movement towards technology and the adoption of technology by all sectors is something that I've personally been quite astounded by.
Yeah, yeah. And in a lot of ways, when I made a shift to media, I
Yep.
didn't anticipate how much technology would be involved in that as well, right? Because you
Yep.
feel like, okay, let's make a movie, let's make a podcast, get a good
Yeah.
idea, good guess, and
Yeah.
you are done. But coming up with those ideas, or
Yeah.
like, how do you derive insights into a market where essentially the barriers to entry are zero, right?
Hmm.
As
Hmm.
long as you have a
Hmm.
smartphone, you can be a podcaster.
Hmm.
uh,
Yep.
as long as you have an iPhone or a decent smartphone, you can be a filmmaker. There are film festivals that are
Yep.
created just for like iPhones or mobile devices, and so they are
Absolutely.
trying to capture them as well. So what I found interesting was that you can use technology to derive insights into a market that is very crowded, and that could be your
Yeah.
differentiating factor. There's I have a
Absolutely.
friend who studied data science at NYU, and she was
Yeah.
just looking for some fun project to apply her
Mm-hmm.
skills. And I thought, yeah, why don't you use podcasts, like have work with
Yeah.
me, give me some insights. I can give
Mm-hmm.
you like the basics of how
Access for
I go
data.
through it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so what she did was she created this AI engine, like sort of a small scale engine that like crawls
Mm-hmm.
through the data, like the platforms,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
essentially identifies the gap in each category. So like, okay, business podcast, this is missing,
Very cool.
relationship
Yep.
podcast, this is missing. And out of that,
Very cool.
we found that there is no reality show podcast. There are podcasts about reality show. So there would be a show
Very
about
interesting.
like Bachelor or Big Boss
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there is
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
podcast itself that is a reality show, right? So I
Yeah.
thought,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
relationship is like, a big one. So I'm like, okay, let's just
Huge.
create a podcast where two strangers could meet for a blind date on a podcast episode. And that was an insight
Fascinating.
I didn't feel
Yeah.
that I would have, but because we had the
Without that.
technology, yeah. And so it was really surprising, and the show really kicked off. Like, it got into top 20 podcast charts in a lot
Wow.
of places in India as well.
Yep.
So
Wow.
yeah, well, technology is fascinating. So I think
There
I
you go.
mean,
Right. And exactly. In every, it doesn't have to be a radical thing. It's just like even data and insights can make you, your product more successful. Just like what you managed to do, right, with that insight. So absolutely, technology can be used in so many different ways.
yeah, yeah. And so yeah, a lot of people do not invest in technology or do not invest in that knowledge base that they could
Yeah.
get.
Yeah.
And yeah, then it's very difficult for them once other competitors have come into the play, and now they don't have either the capacity or resources to scale. So Yeah,
Absolutely.
once.
The sooner you adopt technology and just find a way to make it serve you, I think you're better placed as a company to try and compete. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. And podcasting space, and right now particularly, they're experimenting a lot with advertising and how to be more
Yep.
dynamic with that.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, I didn't think of all these things once like before getting into it. For me, it was just the love of storytelling. But
Yeah. Just the creative aspect.
yeah,
Yeah.
to stay relevant, you have to stay on top of these things. Okay, so what are the hottest market segments you're currently looking at as a VC? Now, you spoke about the technology aspect, which is sort of an
Yeah.
underlying thing in each
Yep.
venture that
Yep.
you look for. But other like
Yep.
standalone ones, are there any that you sort of?
Yeah, so all our investments are technology enabled, right? So technology is sort of the bedrock, and then within that, what are the spaces? So let's talk about that. So I look at consumer, which means that anything that touches you and me and people like us, consumers, right? Which is what I find exciting. So within that, I think some spaces that I'm particularly excited about. One is gaming. I think you've seen just the massive rise of gaming. COVID has accelerated it, and I think there is huge white space in terms of whether it's platforms that offer gaming, different kinds of games to cater to different audiences, but also infrastructure within gaming that is super exciting as a space. So just one broad sector is gaming. I think audio, right? I know we're on a podcast, but I definitely think audio is under leveraged, and some exciting companies. We've seen startups building in the audio space, so that's super exciting. Social commerce, I think there is a large portion of India which cannot be catered to by the Amazons and Flipkarts of this world, and so you need interesting social commerce players to reach these consumers. So super excited about that. And lastly, B2B marketplaces. So as just like what Amazon and Flipkart have done for the consumer side, I think there will be platforms similar across businesses, right, and for business consumers to use. So these are some of the sectors that I particularly am looking at, and I find quite exciting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, the kind of innovation that in a very weird way that COVID has enabled people to come up with. I think it,
Yeah,
in a way, that's a good thing that has emerged out of this. Now, of course, it's terrible that people are, losing their lives, and India, like,
so
currently
yeah,
is going through this crazy situation. But yeah, I think it has
yeah,
also compelled a lot of players to sort of look at things in a different manner, and uh, that has been this sort of like new lease of life on a lot of ventures that were otherwise faltering, right? And gaming, of course,
yeah,
it's I everybody knows the Twitch success story, but
yeah,
it's crazy how, like, esports and a lot of other things here
yeah,
where people are
yeah,
going out and specifically building infrastructures for these kind of uh,
absolutely. Yeah,
ventures to grow. So yeah, I think gaming certainly has, you know, taken that turn that nobody saw coming, but just sort of exploded in last 5 years. Right.
yeah.
Okay.
And gaming is also such a social phenomena, right? So I always also look at gaming just as a like social network in itself. I mean, today a lot of the large gaming platforms are used as social networking hubs and for people to use as a place to hang out. In fact, right, a lot of younger millennials and Gen Zs, yes, look at gaming as a way to keep in touch with friends. Actually, so super interesting how all these trends are converging, and I think gaming will be the next kind of social media over the next 10 years. So definitely something to look out for.
Yeah, yeah. I think the only kind of networked gaming that I remember that I last did was the Counter
Yeah.
Strike,
Yeah,
and we used to have this LAN tournaments
yeah,
where it's
yeah,
just
yeah.
Counter Strike. Like, still, it's restricted to just
It's
one
big.
location
Yeah,
because it's
yeah,
LAN. It was not like this whole multiplayer thing that it's right
yeah,
now. But yeah, college fests are a great place to identify these kinds of talent where it's just people showing up
absolutely,
from different colleges and just absolutely decimating the
absolutely.
competition. So you see the early
Yeah, it's
signs
good
of,
fun.
like, okay, this guy is going to become a legendary game player. And I think this is something that I was quite fascinated when I was in Japan, that there's a whole subsection of gaming where it's just gaming testers, like individual gamers, who'll just
Hmm.
test the beta versions of the game and say that okay, the gameplay is too slow, maybe you could
Yeah.
improve here, or maybe the levels do not
Yeah.
progress properly. So they just give these nuances to the game developers, and
Yeah.
I didn't think that was a real job, but it's a booming, thriving industry now where people
Yeah.
take these suggestions very seriously. Uh, so yeah, it's somebody told me, I think there's a game called Final Fantasy where to uh, to advance to a next level you have to go through a boss level, and that actually takes 72 real life hours. Like you have to
Wow.
sit through
Wow.
72 hours, not in one stretch, but you can save
Right.
the progress, go back at it, and then continue from there. So
Right.
it's just
Yeah. No,
very
it's
very
interesting, and
exciting.
I think India is in an interesting place as well, right? You've got you know close to 350 million smartphone users will grow massively, right? One of the cheapest data costs in the world, right? One of the highest number of gigabytes used per month, right? So much consumption of media, UPI and everything in place now. People willing to spend micropayments, so everything is sort of coming together. And gaming, it just makes a lot of sense. Lots of things need to be figured out, but I think there's a lot of good that will come in the gaming space over the next 10, 15 years in this country at least. So,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I feel like I've become that old uncle now who like looks at these younger
yeah.
kids playing these games, and I was like,
Yeah.
back in my days we only had like a little handheld video game or something like that.
Yep.
Like
Yep.
PlayStation was radical for me. I remember I'm like, oh, you can play a game on a console, and because my family deals in electronics,
Ah, okay.
I would be the first one to get all those fancy gadgets. Like, so whenever
Yeah.
there's a new PlayStation, it
Yeah.
automatically comes to me. And
Nice.
so I've not played games for a very long time. I mean, on my smartphone I do sometimes, but it's
Yeah.
just like it has evolved to such an extent that I just am
You
fascinated
feel
by.
out of, yeah, like a fish out
Yeah,
of water almost, right? It's just
yeah, sometimes,
so. Yeah.
because the
Yeah.
games are
Yeah.
very much complicated now, right? In the sense that there's the whole social element to it, there's an e-commerce
Yes.
element to it,
Yes. Yes.
customization and all of those things. So sometimes I find it overwhelming. I'm like, there's so much
Yes.
customization, it's easy to
Yes.
get lost in
Yeah.
details.
Which is why you're seeing some games like Among Us, etc., which are super simple, right? And people who are a little intimidated by the very complex games are attracted to which is what I'm saying. I think that's a white space. For example, like female-oriented games, right? There's no real female-oriented games, or games for people over 60 years old, for example, right? I'm just making stuff up, but like large swords of customer segments which are overlooked by game developers, and I think those can be large markets as well. So lots of exciting things for people who are intimidated by mid and hardcore kind of gaming. So
Yeah, you can certainly count me in that category.
yeah, for sure.
So so yeah, uh, great. Okay, so what would be your reasons not to invest in a company regardless of the market opportunity?
So I think, regardless of the market opportunity, I think it again comes back to founders, right? We invest, a lot of it has to do with founders, and we don't invest, also a lot of it has to do with founders. So if we just feel like, sometimes the founders are not as passionate or deeply committed to a particular problem, if we don't think they're in it for the right reasons, or if their vision isn't just aligned with the way we're thinking about the market, or if we feel like they don't have a distinctive edge or an insight that is earned. So these are some of the reasons why we don't invest in a particular founder. But you know this is no secret, but when you invest in at an early stage, the the everything changes, right? So you invest in a particular idea, but 6 months later, the entire product looks very different, right? But what stays the same really is the founders. So we spend a lot of time trying to identify if this founder or this team of founders is the right team to keep iterating, being so obsessed with the customer and trying to solve that problem. And no matter what happens, they will find a way to pivot and turn and build a very large company. So the answer to that question is we invest largely because of the founders, and sometimes we don't invest also because of founders.
Right. Yeah. So team, of course, is a huge aspect of what
Yeah.
drives organizations and ideas forward. Do you
Absolutely.
ever run into a situation where you find a very promising group of individuals as a team, but they don't have any demonstrated sort of financial performance for whatever reason, being an early player or the industry not ready yet? Do you run into
Yeah.
situations like that? And if you do, then how do you evaluate, like, how do you trade off between those things?
Yeah. I mean, a lot. So we'll been actually, meet a lot of founders who are extremely strong, right? Who are repeat founders in some cases, and a lot of times, they are figuring out what exactly the product will look like, right? They don't have traction. There's no revenues, but we still make those investments in some cases because we just think that these people understand this space so deeply, right? They've spent so much time analyzing this particular customer segment. Their past gives us comfort that they will not give up, right? Because of, they've done things in the past which gives us that kind of confidence. And so we're willing to make that early stage bet saying that we know that this team is capable of figuring out, maybe not today, but 6 months, a year from now, the right solution to this problem. And they'll keep iterating to make the end consumer happy. So yes, to answer your question, and those are those sometimes can be the best investments because problems are difficult to solve, and it takes teams some time. But the really strong founders are able to find solutions, and we are looking for those founders all the time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think my family business, or like my dad in a
Yeah,
particular capacity,
yeah,
he at one point was trying to be a VC, like in a very non-traditional sense, like not to
sure,
set up a VC firm and then invest in
right,
businesses, but
right,
as like he has saved some of his money, he felt that okay, a better
yeah.
use of that would be to invest in
Yeah,
promising companies. And
yeah,
he kind of juggles more with this thing where okay, you know
hmm,
you have a strong talented team of people who have been in this space and they
yeah,
know the ins and outs very well, but they don't
yeah,
have any sort of financial performance to back it. And so essentially
exactly,
then it becomes a case by case basis thing. But yeah, I think
absolutely,
looking at him trying to go through this, different iterations of like okay, what that would look like, and how could he,
hmm,
as an investor, help in the management side of things without being too,
yes, yes,
like without overpowering the vision or the idea of the
yes,
founders. And so yeah, I think,
yeah,
I mean, it's great to see that okay, even on a structured, like corporate level, that those are the trade-offs that you have to make. So my dad is not crazy then, okay, so good to know.
absolutely not.
Yeah. So because he doesn't see, the thing is he dropped out after ninth grade.
Oh
He
wow,
didn't, yeah, he hasn't had any fancy business education, but because my grandfather had a family business, my uncle
hmm,
and my dad sort of became the first employees, because those were the only ones who
yeah,
were willing to work for free, right? And my grandfather
yeah,
needed more additional employees. So they've been in
yeah,
this space for so long that they understand what are the risk factors intuitively, uh,
absolutely,
on a sense that okay, you know this could play out into different scenarios. They do rely on data
hmm,
time to time,
hmm,
but not to the level where,
yeah,
like, a lot of younger entrepreneurs do, because their instinct
do,
have been sharpened by this different scenarios. So
absolutely,
it's that. But
absolutely,
yeah, I think sometimes those investments where it could be hit or miss kind of thing, because I mean, like, well, every investment is a
yeah,
hit or miss kind of thing because we don't know what's going to happen in future. But I mean, yeah, those ones
absolutely,
could turn out to be, they could be just missing one thing, in the sense that okay, it's only a matter of couple of years that the industry grows, and then things could
yeah.
turn. So yeah, I think it requires
It requires
proper
vision. It
consideration.
requires that belief in vision.
Yeah,
Absolutely,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So that's great. Uh, okay, so in your view, what is the value a startup accelerator can add, and why?
yeah,
Because uh,
yeah,
it's something that sort of has emerged recently, where like people
yeah,
seriously considered being part of an accelerator. But let's say 30 years back, it was not like such a
yeah.
prevalent thing. So yeah,
Yeah.
your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, look, capital is a commodity these days, right? I think so much capital is flooding the market that, I think smart entrepreneurs should look at whether it's an accelerator or even a VC. They should ask themselves what value besides capital can that VC provide, right?
Right.
Or the startup accelerator. So, I talk about Bloom just for a minute here. When we started, obviously I wasn't around, but when the founder started Bloom, the idea was always to build a platform, right, where we add massive value to portfolio founders above and beyond just capital, right? So we started with sort of helping our founders with things like accounting, tax, legal, compliance, right? All these things that founders don't necessarily want to deal with to focus on the business, right? And today that has spun out as its own sister concern, right? We've got a team that helps portfolio founders with hiring, right? And now that has become its own sister concern. We've got an internal team that helps with founders with portfolio fundraising, right? So raising capital for next rounds. We've got a team that helps with operational aspects, community and engagement, and business development. So and partnerships. So we've always tried to, if you get invested by Bloom, you have access to this entire platform that works on behalf of you to really maximize your chances of success. And I think that's the kind of value that some startup accelerators provide as well, right? The access to networks, to tap into different people, right? To meet new investors. So I think it's an interesting model for sure. I think you'll see more accelerators come on board and new platforms being built. But I do think that good founders should think about, where they take the capital from very, very carefully.
Yeah, yeah. Because I think, there's this saying that, not every money is good money, in
Yeah,
the sense that, okay, if money comes with this additional set of responsibilities,
yeah,
then it might actually hurt you, where now you have to hit certain thresholds, but you do not have the capacity to. And because you have taken the money without considering that, okay, do I have the ability to keep up with
yeah,
them? Now you are stuck in this operational, aspects, whereas the company
yeah,
is not growing. So you're complying but not growing, which is, not a good
yeah,
situation to be in. And so I see a lot of founders, especially the ones, like, who are just right out of college, haven't had sort of
mm,
experience of
mm,
bootstrapping or
mm,
understanding, how to make the most of your resources. They end up falling in
yeah,
this trap where, they give up too much of a share very early on, because they're getting money
mhm,
that otherwise they wouldn't get.
mm,
But that means that, okay, now they have to perform on a certain level, and they just don't know. Like, sometimes people get overwhelmed with
yeah,
just the kind of money that is being invested, because they've not thought on a level, uh, that, okay, if I suddenly receive this much money, which is perhaps 10
yeah,
times more than I was expecting, how do I,
yeah,
allocate those resources? So
absolutely.
yeah, I mean, I'm sure you must have seen Silicon Valley, right? The HBO series.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you see some people end up in that position where, some,
yeah,
millionaire writes a check for you in the hopes that you guys will earn him, a certain return. Lo and behold, you are now struggling to keep up. So yeah, I think it's really important, because money is one aspect of it, but then what other avenues or what other kind of support you can get, right? So it's a
absolutely.
whole
Yeah.
spectrum of things. It's not just the money that makes sure your business runs efficiently. It's also like the
Yeah, and you
people.
want to make sure it's the people, it's also you want to make sure that you have a good relationship with, because it's all like, it's true, it's like a marriage, right? You are literally marrying an investor, especially if they're investing in you at an early stage. It's a relationship that hopefully lasts for 10, 15 years, if not more. And so you want to make sure you have partners who believe in you, who you can, who you feel proud of being associated with, and there's mutual respect involved, right? And who will always be your biggest cheerleader, but will also give you constructive feedback when it's required in a healthy manner. So there's a lot needs to be looked at. And unfortunately or fortunately, in today's environment where deals are happening so fast, sometimes both sides don't have that courtship process to be able to figure out these kind of dynamics. So it's getting a little more challenging than I think it used to be back in the day.
Yeah, yeah. And I also kind of, see that when the For the most time, I mean, like, economy is one aspect of how much investment flows, like, what's the deal,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
flow overall. But I sometimes feel that Silicon Valley falls into this trap of, like, okay, if we just keep throwing money at things, eventually something will stick, right? And so you see case studies like, Theranos and Quibi,
Right.
where it's just like they have a lot of financial muscle behind it, but it's
Yeah.
essentially a solution to a problem that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Theranos was good. It's just that, well, the idea was good. It's just that, it was uh, wrong on
Yeah.
so many
And
levels.
capital can't solve every problem. Yeah, very wrong on many levels. But capital can't solve every problem, right? You need to. At least at Bloom, we try and build very capital efficient companies, and we make sure the founders are spending on things in a manner which sets them up for success, and not wasting resources if it's not required. So a lot of this comes down to the investors and how they guide the founders as well.
Right. Okay. So, what should startups think about before contacting a VC? What kind of questions generally impress you? Like, what kind of questions indicate to you that, okay, this startup has done their homework before approaching us?
No, it's a good question. I think you know first of all, not I just want to say that not every company needs venture capital money, right? There are certain kinds of businesses that do not require venture capital money, right? If you're taking venture capital money, right, you need to understand that VCs want the end outcome typically to be $1 billion company, right? So just know that when you're approaching any venture capitalist, typically you are, especially if it's our kind of fund, which is $100 million kind of fund, $150 million, right? You essentially are looking for $1 billion outcome, right? So a founder needs to really have that kind of ambition to be in this for a very very long period of time. So I think we're always trying to gauge, is this somebody who can build $1 billion company? Is Are there motivations for doing this, right? And then this comes back to something we were discussing earlier in the podcast, which is like, when you're asking for capital, I think we like founders who are very thoughtful about where will this money get you in the next 12 to 18 months, right? What will your metrics look like, right? How much money will you need to raise at that point in time? And so someone who's really thought about where will this money be allocated, exactly what do I need it for, and what will this set me up for in 12 to 18 months, I think this is something we like. When someone's done their homework, they have answers to these questions in a crisp, concise manner, right? And they can articulate very confidently and passionately why this money is required at this point in time. I think these are some of the things that at least impress us.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's easy to sort of get lost in this sea of, overthinking a lot of things early in
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
the early stages of the company. And
Yeah.
you're right. I mean, VCs, are in the business of growing companies and then exiting with like a huge exit multiple, right? And so
Yeah.
that's as simple as that. And sometimes people don't realize, they just feel that, okay, we have the money and now we can just do whatever we want with it. And
Mm.
that's usually the case, as you were saying, that there has not been enough courtship time, and there's not been enough
Yeah.
understanding between founders and investors to understand where collectively they want to take the company. And yeah, so I think that makes so much sense, right? That
Yeah.
VCs are also in it to make money, but they
Yeah,
also have
because
to
we are
ensure.
answerable to our LPs, right? And
Yeah.
so it's exactly, and so and we actually spend a lot of time educating some of the first time founders who pitch to us, right? These are typically college graduates who may not have that much real world experience. They've got a great idea and they're super passionate, but they don't realize that when you're taking money from a fund like ours, we really expect you to become $1 billion company, right? That is the every time we invest in a company, that's the vision. And so
Right.
only if you're ready to ride that journey, should you take sort of VC money,
Yeah.
is what we
Yeah.
suggest.
So given that, uh, do you so sometimes, there are industries that are at a particular stage, especially when they're growing. There's a lot of consolidation that happens, right? Like,
Hmm.
strong promising emerging players are acquired by
Yeah.
bigger corporations. Does that how much emphasis do you lay on that? Because I mean, of course, if you're thinking of $1 billion valuation, then it needs not to be first acquired by a bigger company and then it needs to
Yeah,
consistently grow at a certain rate to achieve that. Uh, but like, how much importance do you place on exit strategy, where you know that, okay, given the the situations in the
yeah,
particular industry, it is possible that if you hit a certain threshold, you might receive an acquisition offer from a bigger
yeah.
corporation.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I just want to say, first of all, in the one complaint about the Indian market that is that we haven't seen that kind of liquidity and exits, right? It's a as much as the West, and I think that will change, but it's in progress. To answer your question, look, I think we're always cognizant about what potential M&A might happen in this space, right? So we have a list of companies that potentially could acquire a startup, and that's great to know. But we're not betting on that outcome, saying that if you get to a certain size. I think for us it's always, can this company independently, if everything goes right, list on a public market at some point and be a $1 billion company independently. And if on the way, something, anything can happen, right? I mean, and sometimes the company might fold up, right? It's a reality in venture capital, and it might get acquired, right? For a good acquisition or a subpar acquisition, anything can happen. But so we try and know what's happening in the industry and have a list of potentially what may be acquirers, but it's not something we hang our hat on and bet things on. We want to believe that this is the founding team, the market is large enough, and if everything goes right, they can independently become a very, very large company, is the way we think about it.
Yeah, yeah. And that's, I think, one key difference that I've found between the way VC is approached in the US versus in India,
Okay.
where a lot of venture capitalists in the US will demand an exit strategy that, okay, sometimes we want deliberately to get acquired, and so that's the whole focus. Then they are like, okay,
Interesting.
we the industry seems a bit up and down right now, so we don't know if it will reach a certain stage where it could become a unicorn, so as to say.
Yep.
But
Yep.
there are possibilities that we could have a great acquisition offer, and that
Yep.
might allow us to
Yep.
reinvest and experiment a bit more in the same space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the reason I say that is because, well, podcasting in US at least,
Yeah.
well, Joe Rogan is getting paid $100 million, which is great. I mean,
Yeah.
Spotify, uh, paid, I think, $300 million for two platforms that they acquired. So Anchor, which is a
Anchor.
audio hosting, and Gimlet, which was
Yeah.
a agency where they were just
Yeah.
content producers. Then they became agency. Um, so yeah, I think that is something that I kind of wonder from time to time, that, okay, if I have to grow my company, what kind of acquisition offer I would be happy with if someday Spotify or Apple knocks on my door. I'm like, hey, you've been doing some good stuff and we are interested.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a fascinating industry to be in right now, because there's so much,
Absolutely.
you know
No, it's super, super interesting. It's a great
yeah.
time to be in the space for sure.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense that you want to see through a company to like its full maturity, rather than thinking that we might have to exit on a certain
Yeah.
level. Okay. Um, is it hard to figure out if a startup is just in it for money? Like, we spoke about, like, how some people are would just want to see that check, and then just
Yeah. Yeah.
have that
Yeah.
bragging rights that, hey, we are VC funded now, and get all the
Yeah.
PR and
Yeah.
all the media stuff out there.
Yeah.
Some people are just in it for money, some people are not. But as an
Yeah.
investor, as part of a VC firm, how do you make those judgment calls?
Yeah. So it is hard and it's not, right? First of all, I just want to say, if you are building a startup to make money, the chances are you probably won't succeed, because it is just such a hard journey that if money is your motivating factor, you are likely to give up, right? There has to be something deeper than just the money, right? Is it, wanting to solve a problem, wanting to build a name? There's something much deeper that drives the really, really successful founders, right? So we try and absolutely gauge for this and filter for this. It is not easy, but in a sense it is, because if you speak to somebody enough times, like spend time with them, the way they articulate a problem and just speak about their customers, and the passion, I think, is something you cannot fake, right? And I think, you're able to tell if someone is doing this for the right reasons. It's almost pattern recognition. If you meet enough founders, I think that's what starts to happen. But there's something in that interaction where you get a sense of, this person genuinely cares about this so much that they will not give up no matter what happens. They're not doing it for the money, right? It's hard, but it's also not. So I don't know how to, if that's a good answer, but it just, yeah. But it's something. All I'd say is it's something you need to check for, because the motivating factor needs to be much deeper. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I think it's something that is hard to describe in words, in the sense that
Yeah.
I feel that when I am hiring people for my company,
Yeah. Yeah.
where I follow this principle that
Hmm.
my that one of the professors at
Hmm.
Harvard Business School told me, that hire for attitude and train for skills. Because if they have the right attitude, they'll learn the
Yes.
skills in no time. So but if it
Yep.
is so
Yep.
focused on skills, that if you need somebody with that kind of
Hmm.
skills but they are a bad player, then they might end up
Yep.
ruining your entire team. And I've seen both sides of
Absolutely.
it, where I hired somebody just for like the qualification, but they turned out to be a
Yeah.
very bad team player.
Yeah.
And then I
Yeah.
hired people just for that zest and just for that passion to be in that space or to
Yeah.
make a difference,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
learned every technical thing in no time. Like,
Absolutely.
you could just
Absolutely.
tell the way people interact with, like, their interface, in the sense that when I see an editor, when I work with my editor, and I see how
Mm-hmm.
quickly he's able to implement ideas, even on a very basic level, when I say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, how about we do the transition here, or how about we add a
Mm-hmm.
graphic here, and he'll quickly
Yeah.
come up with something, and he'll say, okay,
Nice.
this is
Nice.
basic version, but I can you know make it, like, you can take
Nice.
some time and make it much better. So you get the sense of, like, okay, this person is really enjoying this and not just
Yeah.
doing it because, oh yeah, my monthly salary depends on this. So yeah, it's
Absolutely.
hard thing to describe, but you
It's
you
hard to
pick up
describe.
you pick up on that once you interact with people
Yes.
enough number of times. I think that's a very, very
Yes.
good advice. And yeah, I just find it so fascinating that sometimes people feel that they could just get the money, and they might even succeed, they might be able to fake it, but,
It
well,
happens. Yeah.
yeah, you won't be able to succeed in real life. Like, eventually the reality will hit
Hmm.
you, and then, so
Hmm.
what do you do then,
Hmm.
right? So yeah, not a good approach, but some people just, well, do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, before Bloom Ventures, you were a part of IFC at the World Bank Group. How did you feel your experiences have changed your view on startups? Because I think IFC, that was in Washington, right?
I was in Bombay for 2 years and then moved to Washington D.C. for 2.5 years. So I did both offices. Yeah.
So, how have your experiences changed, in the sense that, okay, you worked with IFC in Mumbai and then in Washington, but then you came back and now you're part of Bloom.
Yeah.
So, in general, sort of, like, what were some of the skills or some of the scenarios that you, and I know you spoke
Yeah.
about, like, okay, IFC was, private equity,
Yeah.
and now you are part
Yeah.
of VC.
Yeah.
So, just kind of,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
have you sort of evolved through this journey?
Yeah. Absolutely. No. So uh, private equity is very different because you're investing at a much later stage, and at that point, there's a lot of history about a company. There are a lot of financial information, so a lot of the work there is actually making sure you don't lose capital. It's a very different mindset, right? It's almost capital preservation on each deal. You cannot lose money for sure, and then you're looking to make 3 to 5x, right? uh, and which means that you are projecting the future of the company on Excel. You're doing a lot of discounted cash flow modeling. You're doing a lot of exit. There's a lot of raw sort of technical analysis that you're doing. Whereas when you come to the early stage, these are very early companies. Typically, it's just a PowerPoint and founders, right? Maybe some product and some sort of traction, and so there's you can't really do any of this analysis, right? So then the decision making is a lot more gut driven, a lot more understanding of how a sector will evolve, right? So night and day in terms of the skill sets required. There are some overlaps, I think. Whether it's your ability to just understand the financial aspects of things, understand sectors, understand companies, these things are maybe overlapping. But in terms of skill sets, completely different. So I had to adapt actually quite quickly from going for more a private equity mindset, which was capital preservation, to early stage venture where a lot of the companies will lose money, but the 2 3 5 will end up returning your fund and plus plus plus, right? So very different mindsets, and been challenging, but also very rewarding and fun to adapt to early stage venture. I find myself more in my element, or just more excited at this stage of investing. Maybe it's a personality thing, and that's what I advise young people as well, right? I think you have to figure out what your personality is. If you're super analytical, if you like diving really deep into companies and are excited by balance sheets and structuring of transactions, then you probably will better off in private equity. But if you're much more excited about working closely with founders, how technology is reshaping industries, right, and just being more gut driven in that sense, then maybe early stage ventures for you. So I think this is all a learning process, and some people do better, but it's all a spectrum, and you can fall anywhere on that spectrum.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that, finance is not just the commercial banking that you see. It's investment
Yeah.
banking, it's asset management, it's so many
Yeah,
more
it's a lot.
aspects to that. And so all of them have a very different required skill sets, right?
Yeah.
So when I was
Yeah.
part of the research team at JP Morgan, it was like very
Yeah.
deadline driven environment. So you have to do the research, you have to
Mm-hmm.
build pitch
Mm-hmm.
books, and then you have to
Mm-hmm.
walk the banker through, like, okay, if you're pitching it to this, then all this information is laid out this way. So then
Mm-hmm.
when they
Mm-hmm.
broker a deal,
Mm-hmm.
then the banker knows specifically where each
Yeah.
information is. uh, and so that requires a different kind of skill set where you have to balance a bit of creativity in how you put data together with also
Yeah.
understanding what is relevant to
Yeah.
that deal. But at
Yeah.
the same time, when I was working with a smaller firm and they had to manage their own finances, it's much slower. Like, in a lot of sense, it comes down to
Mm.
understanding the nuances of the relationship of the seller and the buyer. So a lot of
Yeah.
times it would be the
Yeah.
product is delivered but the
Yeah.
payment doesn't arrive for 2 months. Okay, so then there's like huge receivables management that you have to look into as a separate thing, and
Yeah.
what kind of tax
Yeah.
implications that has. So yeah, I mean, a core skill set is a good thing to have, but then what aspects of those you are applying on a day-to-day basis changes based on what end of
A
industry
lot.
you're in.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and so
Absolutely.
that's true for, I mean, media as well, because media, you
Mm-hmm.
can think of like print journalism, new media, old media, all of
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And when i when I got into media, I sort of underestimated it. I didn't respect the art form. Like, okay, yeah, well, how hard filmmaking could be, right? It's just like bunch of stuff on camera, until I had to make my own film and realized, oh, this is hard. And I
No,
should
I'm
have, like,
sure.
it's not by surprise that people who go on to win accolades have put in their time
Mm.
and effort to build that expertise and that understanding. So yeah, I think,
No shortcut. Yeah.
yeah. And so yeah, private equity has always been this sort of mystery thing to me. I mean, like, everybody has had this. I think everybody did this case study of like how Dell was taken private and then whatever followed after
Mhm.
that. But I mean, yeah, you don't get to hear much about it, right? You hear the acquisition stuff happening, you hear quarterly results and all that corporate finance stuff. But yeah, I think private equity sort of operates on a different level, I feel. So yeah, I've had run-ins, but like, sort of on a very theoretical, very
Sure.
basic.
Sure.
Okay,
Sure.
so okay, it's I want to sort of throw like a hypothetical scenario just to kind of see how you
Sure.
approach a particular problem. But okay, if a VC
Sure.
invests $500,000 in an early stage fintech startup, what percentage of shares should typically be
Yeah.
sacrificed?
Super case to case driven, but like a broad rule of thumb is, I think in any round, a founder should dilution is very important, right? Because it is important, and so you don't want to dilute maybe more than 25% of your company, right? So and every VC, at least at our stage, right, we're looking for at least 20% of the company. So I would say if you can be in that 20 to 25% range for 500K, right, and then look, I think it's no secret that really at early stage valuation and is all a function of supply and demand, right? So how much,
Yeah.
it's all a negotiation, right? And it's all supply demand. So these are all rules of thumb, but I think 20 to 25% dilution at that kind of level is broadly in range with what you're seeing in the market. And again, these things are very different. If you're a first time founder, if you're a repeat founder, then you can get away with less dilution, right? We're seeing rounds much higher valuations for repeat founders. So very case to case driven. But if you're a first time founder and you're trying to raise 500K, we typically ask you for 20 to 25% of the company at least. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense, and of course, there are a lot of moving parts, but
Yeah.
all these factors do come into play, and they are sort of the testament for will this person be able to see this project or this company through or not. And I mean, essentially, as long as everybody's on
Yeah.
board with that idea, that's what should
Yeah.
matter. I think there was this joke that
Absolutely.
how Elon Musk is just like coming up with new companies in the hopes of like getting more and more funding for each radical idea that he comes up with, and he could demonstrate little success in one industry and then use that to raise funds for some other company. And it's just like he's on this loop where
Sure.
more and more companies
Yeah.
get him higher and higher, like valuations at at each stage, and eventually something will click, like eventually something will stick, and that will be the reason that okay, he will be able to retain all his wealth. But it's yeah, it's fascinating to see how like he approaches these kind of things, where a lot of people usually, because it's an intensive process, right? Like fundraising is a job in
No,
itself.
absolutely. Depending on the company, but typically a founder's 25 to 50% of a time founder's time goes into just fundraising, right? And
Yeah.
so we're also looking for that ability in founders. Can you I think the best founders are people who are able to bring on board resources, right, that other people can't. So whether it's capital, whether it's talent, right, whether it's clients, all you're doing really as a founder is like constantly bringing people into your vision, right? And that's what Elon is so good at. That's what Steve Jobs is so good at, and a bunch of top. They just make people fall in love with the vision, and and they're able to attract talent, capital, clients, and everything comes magically together. Obviously, I'm making it sound much more easy, but it's that ability, it's that innate ability to get people to buy into whatever you're doing, right? And that's something we're always trying to look for and identify as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I didn't realize. I mean, I was a bit surprised because I mean, fundraising for films is like okay, well, you could approach independent producers
Right.
or studios, but unless you
Right.
have deep industry connections, you won't get those
Yep.
15 minutes in the room with
Yep.
those people. So of course, you
Yep.
go and like fundraise with people. So
Yep.
crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, and
Hmm.
when I
Hmm.
did that, the initial it was very because up until that point I had bootstrapped everything, so I know how to manage my own finances. Right now, when you're raising capital
Yep.
from
Yep.
people,
Sure.
there is a tax implication of
Yeah.
that, and then you also have sort of this
Yeah.
responsibility to deliver on perks and final result.
Responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I found I had fun because then I was able to bring in more people and like, hey, let's just make a video. So you as an actor say this, you as a writer say this, and I as a director will say this, and it worked. Like we were able to get
Right.
through all of those things. But I mean, yeah, I had very sort of
Interesting.
um, difficult time trying to understand that what is it that should I provide to people to believe in that. So like a
Hmm.
trailer or like the talent of the team is one thing, but then if I'm a first time filmmaker
Yeah.
with no film school education, what would compel somebody to say that hey, here's my 25 bucks and go and finish the editing or the coloring of your
Yeah.
film, whatever. So so yeah, that
Yeah.
kind of sometimes you fall into that thing where like okay, I don't know if I'll be able to raise it, But you just, if you have people around you to support you, then I think it becomes much more easier. And
Very
that's when I
important.
realized it's
Very important.
a full-time job. It's a job unto itself, that okay, I finished
Yes.
filming everything first, made a rough trailer, like a proper trailer of the scenes,
Mm-hmm.
and then we were
Mm-hmm.
able to fundraise to finish post production. But it was a
Yeah.
whole thing, like
Great learning. Yeah, great learning.
right. Okay. So last couple of questions.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on business education? Do you think the high price tag is justified? Because, well, it's a huge debate,
Yeah.
to a larger extent in the US and to a lesser extent in India. But I mean, this
Yeah.
whole thing of like, okay, you're paying so much money, taking on
Yeah.
student debt to
Yeah.
go through a program. What are your thoughts? Do you think it's worth it?
Yeah. So look, I went to INSEAD, right, which is a business school in France and Singapore, and I think a business school education, the real value is really the network, right, that you build, and the experiences that you have, and the maturity that you gain through those experiences. In terms of learning itself, I think in today's day and age where you have world class content available online for a much cheaper cost, right? I don't think content is what you are really getting at a business school. And so I think what you see happening is as time passes, the value of a business school will definitely, in my opinion, diminish to some extent, right? Because the ability of platforms to give you jobs will become more important, right? People are already talking about unbundling the social aspect of education. So I think very smart edtech founders are trying to disrupt this space. I think the power of the brand though of some of these colleges is so strong that it will take a long time before the top 10, 20 schools are able to get dislodged in that manner. So they just have over the years built such a large brand name and networks and alumni connections and all of that. But I do think, and you've seen this happen, that the value is being questioned, right? And COVID has obviously accelerated that because you can see how much people have taken to online learning. So, to answer your question, I think it is extremely valuable, particularly so some industries more than others. But it will diminish, is my sense, as time goes on, unless
Yeah.
business schools are able to keep up with the times and find a way to change pricing and do a lot of things to keep up with what's happening in the edtech space. So I think it's something that all business schools need to think about, and need to adapt very quickly.
Yeah, yeah. I think, and that's, of course, as you said, COVID has sort of, made it
Yeah.
more apparent to people where that, okay,
Yeah.
now if I don't have a job, then,
Yeah.
how do I pay back? Because student loans, like you can pause payments on mortgages and car loans and stuff like that for like claiming financial hardships, but for
Yeah.
education loans,
Student
it
loans.
keeps piling up, right? And so it's, yeah, a lot of people have sort of begun questioning that, because as you said, like, management concepts do not change that much from university to university. It's really about like the connections that you build with your peers and the professors, and
Yeah.
what kind of access that gives you, right? So for me, it
Yeah.
was like, okay, I took a course in judgment and decision making at Harvard Law, and it's just that I found my co-founder in that class, where there was a guy who's
Yeah.
equally passionate about
Yeah.
kickstarting something in
Yeah.
media. And so I saw the
Yeah.
value as that. Like, now of course I could have read about decision making and
Yeah.
all the fancy stuff anywhere, but I wouldn't have had my
Yeah.
company had I not found
Yeah.
that founder. So things like that.
Absolutely.
And also
Yeah.
in terms of like, the kind of support system it builds for you, in the sense that, okay, if you feel like, oh, I want to transition into a different industry, then alumni or professors who have been in
Yeah.
that space can become like the first point of contact for you to start that transition, right?
Absolutely.
So big schools are
Absolutely.
really good at providing you with that, safe space,
Absolutely.
that ecosystem where you can tap into anytime you need that help or
Yeah.
support. But on a
Yeah.
much lower level, it's like, when schools are not able to offer you that, that's when I think, without like lowering the price too
Mm-hmm.
much, that's when it becomes a
Mm-hmm.
questionable proposition. Like, okay, well, you don't have the
Couldn't agree
connections,
more.
so, or any other kind of high level resources, then what's in it for me? Because just taking on student loan for reading concepts that I could do on YouTube, does not make sense.
Yeah.
So it's that.
Yeah.
But yeah, INSEAD is
Yeah.
like pretty cool. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's
Great experience.
yeah, I think it's one of those offbeat business schools, in the sense that yeah, they have campus in Singapore and France, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
most people try to like aspire like,
Abu
oh,
Dhabi as well.
Abu Dhabi, yeah. But then yeah, I think only recently NYU kind of had its Abu Dhabi campus, and Wharton had a one in
Hmm.
San Francisco. But usually people just stick to this. So in that sense, I think
Yeah.
INSEAD is that sort of global kind of
Very
brand.
global. I think we had over 93 nationalities in my batch. So you just get a, it's very hard to get that kind of multicultural environment. And coming from the World Bank, which was equally diverse, I think I fit right into that environment. So for me, I had a great time there, and quite happy with that experience.
Right. Okay. All right. So this is the last question to you. What would be your advice to people looking to be a part of VC or private equity industry? In
Yeah,
general, like we spoke about it on a skill set level, that okay,
yeah,
you need different
yeah,
skill sets. But in general,
yeah,
what would you advise to people looking to be part of either of these things?
yeah. So and I have conversations with a lot of young folks who are trying to get into these industries, and so my advice is always two or three things. One is, I think, especially for VC, you have to demonstrate real passion for technology and startups, right? That will help set you apart from the rest. And let's remember that these jobs are some of the toughest to break into. There are only a handful of really good venture capital funds in India and across the world. And even within those, the teams are really small. So you're really trying to break into a very competitive environment. So the more you can differentiate yourself, the better, right? So how do you do that? One is, demonstrate deep passion for the space. So whether you maybe join a very early stage startup, right, if you can take that risk early on in life, and just, or spend your free time volunteering and mentoring startups in your local community, right, etc., etc., right, and then try and build a brand by what you're doing, like podcasting or creating content, right? So the more you can differentiate yourself by maybe creating a blog on a particular space that you know really well. Maybe you're a gamer, right, and you just have a differentiated insight about gaming, because you've just spent so much time in it. Start putting out content, right, and that makes it easier when you go to apply for a job and someone's already heard about a blog that you've written. It just makes it so much easier. So do as much as you can to differentiate yourself through content, through demonstrating real value to a startup and the ecosystem. I think that is something that I advise, because as the environment gets more competitive, I think these are the things you have to do to catch people's attention.
Yeah, and I think this is something that came as a surprise to me also, because when I was studying finance on
Yeah,
an undergraduate level, professors would say that yeah, VC firms are like notoriously small. It's like 12, 15 people, and that's it.
yeah,
And
yeah,
there
yeah,
are few funds making huge investments across the world, so it's very
yeah,
hard to break into. And even on an individual level, you need this. You know you need entrepreneurial experience and you need investing experience, and sort of combine that to become a successful VC, right? Because you need to understand on both levels,
yeah,
because sometimes you're backing a
yeah,
vision, as we
yeah,
spoke, which does not have demonstrated financial performance, and sometimes there is that
yeah.
financial performance, but you don't gel well with
Hmm.
the founders. So that sort of
Absolutely. Yep, yep, yep.
combination helps to minimize the downfall or the risk. uh, and yeah, so I think
Agreed.
it's a great fascinating universe. I find it very exciting, and it's just
Yeah,
to
it
be
is.
able to see, like, the first few steps of something that goes on to change the world, I think is a
Mm,
truly
mm.
an exhilarating feeling, right? To see that okay, you were
Yeah.
part of something that made an impact.
No, I feel truly blessed and privileged to be part of Bloom, but just to be in India at a very special time, I think, with everything that's happening. We've got great talent here. We've got, everyone's getting data access to the internet. Smartphone penetration is increasing dramatically. Micropayments and UPI has kicked in. So I truly believe that this is one of the most exciting ecosystems in venture, and will be over the next 10 years, and there'll be a lot of wealth and good things to come out of India in the venture ecosystem, in over the next decade. So I'm excited. It's the reason I came back, post INSEAD to India. I want to be part of this. Unlike a lot of people, obviously, who stayed to do other jobs, and I'm really glad I made that jump and came back.
Yeah, yeah, and it reflects in the way you talk about it. So going back to this whole idea of passion, like something that you cannot fake, and for the past hour that we've spoken, it has been consistent in that. So yeah, thank you so
Appreciate it.
much for your time to share your insights and your ideas and educating me and hopefully the listeners and the viewers on how the ins and outs of the VC industry and how the decisions are made. So yeah, I had a lot of fun talking to you.
Thanks so much, Alok. It's been great. Thanks for having me.